And I am a reverend. That's actually my official title. I am Reverend Vern. Reverend Vernon Gregory Streeter. And in more formal environments, I would actually be the Reverend Vernon Gregory Streeter. Nobody ever calls me the Reverend Vern Streeter except the newspaper. And even in more formal environments, I would be the Right Reverend Vernon Gregory Streeter. What that means is the title Reverend means I am worthy to be revered. Just ask my wife and children. Reverend actually means also holiness. So sometimes you hear people, very religious maybe, being called Your Holiness, which wouldn't be bad. I'm just putting it out there. We are working on a little ad campaign. We're going to invite people to Christmas services. It's going to go in the movie theaters in Billings. It's got this little caricature of me with a hat on, and they are insisting that it says Pastor Vern on the hat, where I'm like, name's Vern, just put Vern on there. But the people that know what they're talking about said no, because this is people that don't really go to church that we're targeting, so they don't know who that weird guy is in the corner, the little caricature, so we got to put your name on there as Pastor Vern. So then I'm like, well, then you call him His Holiness Pastor Vern. But there's not enough room on the little hat, so it's going to be Pastor Vern. So the word reverend actually comes from the Greek word that we also translate into English, sanctification. All that to go. That's what we're talking about today, is sanctification. The Greek word, for those of you that care, which is going to be nobody, is hagion. Comes from an adjective hagios, which comes from the noun hagiosmos. And that noun means saint or sanctification. It means purity and holiness. Now, holy, that just means set apart. That's all that word means. Set apart. That's what sanctification means then. They're all kind of the similar words. It means to be set apart. It means to be pure. Sometimes the Bible uses the word saint to talk about Christians, not like really super Christian people. Every Christian is a saint. Hagiosmos. Set apart, sanctified. The word actually means separate. That's a good way to think about it. Separate. A Christian is separate or set apart from the I don't believe in Jesus world. So Christians are a little different. So here's what I'd like you to start talking about today. I'd like you to talk to each other about a time when you felt out of place. You felt different than kind of everything else that was going on around you. So you were the fish out of water. You were different than what was going on, and that turned out to be a good thing. Let's add that. It turned out to be a good thing. So, I don't know, a few examples. Your friends start doing drugs or something, and you're like, nope, not going to do that. Or maybe at work, there's an unethical thing going on, and you're the one going, nah. Everybody else is kind of in on it. You're going, nope, set apart. You're different. Maybe you didn't get in that car that day. That turned out to be a good decision. Okay, so I'd like you to talk about that, and some of you are uncomfortable talking about that because it makes you look like you made a good decision. And so if you would like, you could spin it a little bit and talk about a time you wish you would have been separate when you had the chance. So you had the chance to I'm not going to do that, but then you went and did it anyway. It didn't turn out so good. So you can talk about it either way. A time you were separate and you were glad you were separate, or a time you weren't separate and you wish you would have been. Okay, this ought to be fun. Go for it. Question number 2. Go. All right. So What I wanted you to see there is it's good to be separate, under the right circumstances, of course. Jesus, separate. Definitely separate from the culture, from the people that he was with, from the religious system of the day. Separate. Christians are to be separate, sanctified, set apart, purified. Separate. Actually, we are separate. This is something that happened to us. And there's a past, present, and future tense to sanctification. So we are separate from the penalty of sin, past. We're separate from the power of sin, present. And we're separate from the presence of sin, future. So you follow that? When you got saved, you got separated from sin and its control in your life and the consequences of it. All that went on Jesus. And then now as a Christian, you are separate from the power of sin. So that means anytime you do sin, you're just giving into it, but you didn't need to. So you're living your life now out from under the power of sin. And one day, you're going to be separate from the presence of sin, meaning in heaven, no more sin. Don't have to worry about that ever again. So, when we talk about what is sanctification? Well, the past is past. There's nothing you can do about that. When you got saved, that sin, that penalty was taken care of. So nothing you can do about that one. Future, nothing you can do about that one either. That's coming. That's later. That's in the future. But present, we can do something about that. We can be sanctified now. So Derry, as he talked about this, said a line that went like this: sanctification is increasingly bearing the actual likeness of God, bringing everything in my life into harmony, conformity, unity with the relationship that I have with God. It's a good sentence. It's a good description. It summarizes another phrase, Christ-likeness. That's what sanctification is now, is this continuing process in the present for us to be conformed to the image of Christ. Christ-likeness. Now, why? Derry dealt with, why this sanctification? Why be sanctified? Well, he talked about giving glory to God, for instance, that the praise and glory goes to God rather than on me. He also talked about living fruitfully in helping and serving other people, and used this phrase, altering somebody else's reality in the way that Jesus altered people's reality. But the one I want you to talk about a little bit is this idea of sanctification. The process of sanctification now for us is about fulfilling my design and capacity. Filling design and capacity. So what he was saying is that you are designed for meaning and significance. God designed you for meaning and significance. He designed you to grow and to increase and to improve. And that is actually built into our DNA, this sense that we have of we want to get better, that we want to improve, that we want to grow. God put that there, and that is part of the sanctification process, where we are increasing our capacity then. So, for instance, I've got a friend who's got a good business, but he's totally reinventing it right now. It's just going to make it bigger and better. And what's he doing? He's doing what God has created him to do. This is the sanctification process for him. Let's talk about Joe Wyndham. So we're helping Joe increase his capacity by adjusting some things in his job description, which includes being the video guy, at least for this series. But we've got a whole bunch of new responsibilities that we're putting on Joe. Why? Part of his sanctification process. And then if you think about the work that he does even with the National Guard, that's Joe increasing his capacity. This is sanctification. I'm trying to increase my capacity. Like really important things, like hunting. I'm trying to become a better hunter. I've been hunting for, 40 years. I'm still trying to improve on it. Less importantly, I'm trying to become a better preacher. Okay, more importantly, but there's a sanctification process that's happening just with that in my calling as a pastor and what I do for Harvest Church. A few months ago, I went to a public speaking conference because I public speak. and I want to be good at it. So I went to increase my capacity and to grow and for me to be sanctified. And God's using that to sanctify me. All right. So here's what I want you to talk about. In what area of your life could you increase your capacity and that would be a good thing? So what area of your life could you increase your capacity and it would be a good thing? And talk about what's holding you back. Like, why aren't you doing it? What's holding you back? Or if you are doing it, what are some of the obstacles? So, what area of your life could you increase your capacity and that would be a good thing? Because increasing your capacity is part of your sanctification process. Go. All right. Be an encouragement to each other as we all increase our capacity. Now, Derry dealt with some of the hows, how to be sanctified. So he talked about how, like, serving people, serving your church, serving others causes sanctification. Or new experiences, taking some risks and having some new experiences. That contributes to your sanctification. But another one is, what I'm going to talk with you about, we're going to talk about two of them. Here's the first one. Community. So, Christianity is communal. God never intends Christians to be isolated, out in the desert by themselves. Nope. Christianity is relational. It is not a solo endeavor. The way Darius said it is, others do this. You give me part of me that I cannot reach or develop in isolation. You give me part of me that I cannot reach or develop in isolation. The idea is that we are not going to be sanctified. We will not mature. We will not grow. We will not grow into Christ-likeness without other people participating with us in that. So that means we need others to irritate us. My term. We need others to irritate us. In other words, we need people that are going to ask the hard questions. We need people to challenge us. We need people to correct us. We need people to smooth off our rough edges. I remember when I was a young youth pastor and trying to follow Christ and be a pastor, and this one guy talked to me just kind of in passing about my rough edges. And it was actually the first time it dawned on me that I might have rough edges. I actually needed someone to tell me that I have rough edges and that they needed to be smoothed. And just knowing that I had rough edges helped me realize, okay, there's some sanctification that's got to happen here, and this guy is one that could help me with that. So it happens in community. Tom, my mentor in ministry and the one who is responsible for me becoming a pastor, he's one of the people that helped smooth my rough edges. My friend Stan Simmons, the monthly lunchtime I have with Stan, there's some sanctification that's happening there. He's asking hard questions or challenging me, correcting me. Steve Slee, my boss, as my superintendent, he's the kind of guy that he asks these penetrating, sort of irritating questions that are very important for me to consider. My small group does this. My Townsend Leadership Program group does this. T Groups does this. So we got to have these kinds of relationships that will smooth those rough edges, irritate a little bit so that we are sanctified. This is what happens in community. By the way, you got to earn the right to be intrusive. Derry's words, intrusive. You got to earn the right to be irritating. So I don't know. You're not Jeremiah. You're not Isaiah. Okay, you're not a prophet. So earn the right. Be winsome. And some of you, one of your rough edges is that you're kind of harsh to people without building the rapport necessary so that they can really receive some truth that you have that might be really good for them. Okay, that was just for free. All right, so here's your question. Who in your life, I want you to share the people, who in your life is allowed to be intrusive? And how does that help you? Who in your life, if you've given permission, they've allowed to be intrusive, even a little irritating, and it helps you? Now, if you mention your spouse, we're going to allow that, because that's actually a good compliment, and they might be sitting there with you and they'd hear it. But then you got to do a +1. So we want to hear more than just your spouse. So it might be your spouse, you could tell us why, but give us one other person in your life that is allowed to be intrusive and how it is that they help you. Okay, welcome back. One more question. We are dealing with the hows. We talked about a couple of them, and then you delved. 1, 2, 3, 4 for a second time. Here we go. All right. One more question today. And what we're dealing with is how to be sanctified. What's the process of sanctification? What are the elements? What are some of the things that contribute to sanctification? I mentioned a couple of them, and then you delved into the one about community. Now we're going to talk about the one Derry talked about that's hard. Suffering. Suffering. Derry said, this side of heaven, suffering is an open door to understand and grow in ways unavailable otherwise. This side of heaven, suffering is an open door to understand and grow in ways unavailable otherwise. So what he's saying is that suffering is actually sanctifying. And we see this all throughout the scriptures. The Apostle Paul talked about having a thorn in his flesh, which we don't exactly know what that was, but it contributed to some suffering in his life. And he did what you and I would do, which is he asked God to remove that so-called thorn. And this is what happened. This is the Apostle Paul. I'm quoting him now. He said to me, God's response back to him, "Hey, Paul." Pretty sure he said, "Hey. Hey, Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Power is now perfected in your weakness and in your suffering. So then Paul goes on, he says, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, my pain, so that Christ's power may rest on me." More pain, more power. I'll take that, is what he's saying. Then he says this, "That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in my weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties." And then the big kicker line, "For when I am weak, then I am strong. When I am weak, then I am strong. When I'm in pain, my strength grows because God's strength is perfected in me." Now, we all experience suffering. And actually, this coming up weekend, Thanksgiving weekend, I'm going to make a little announcement and ask you guys to pray. I'm going to just give a little more, some new news about my spine saga and how the suffering continues and what we're doing about that. But that has been a very difficult 35-year run for me that is sanctifying. And sometimes I sort of shudder to think what I'd be like without all of that pain, based on what the Apostle Paul says here about what suffering produces in our lives in regards to our spiritual growth and our sanctification. Just met recently with a friend who just went through the most agonizing divorce. And so much went wrong in that, financially and just personally and emotionally, and about his dignity and his future. And there's a lot of unknowns and fear around all that stuff. And it was just heart-wrenching to talk about it, and yet so encouraging to have him talk about how his relationship with God is solid and secure, and how he's growing and being sanctified, and he recognizes the things that God is doing, the rough edges that are getting smoothed through this very severe time of suffering and testing. I'm so proud of his good attitude in what's been such a bad situation, and he acknowledges that this thorn in the flesh is part of God's sanctifying work in him. Okay, so you see what's coming. I'd like you to share with each other, and this is how you'll wrap up the discussion time. I'd like you to share with each other, in what ways has suffering been sanctifying for you? So, that means you got to talk a little bit about something that's caused suffering. But then what did you see God do in there, and how has he matured you? How are you a different kind of Christian today than you would have been without that very difficult experience? So we're going to acknowledge that that was terrible, and suffering was something that we feel sorry for you about. And we see the growth that happens in you and realize that God even takes those horrible situations, that terrible suffering, and He produces growth and sanctification in us for His glory, but also for our good. So share it with each other, be encouraging to each other, and I'll talk to you next week.